The Classic FM Arts Daily Podcast with Bob Jones.
Debbie Curtis was born into the big band sound. Her father, Eddie, created his radio big band in 1972, performing with the likes of Frankie Vaughan, Tommy Cooper, Cleo Lane, George Melly and many more. Debbie first played in that band when she was 8, and despite all attempts to pursue a musical career of her own, she took on the band herself in 1994.
Rocking so slow, I want to go right back where I belong, way down south in Birmingham, I mean south in Alabama's an old place where people go to dance the night away.
The Debbie Curtis Radio Big Band is now kept pretty busy, playing retro concerts and producing CDs of big band music. I asked her what it was like to inherit a big band.
Originally this band was started in 1972 by my father, Eddie Curtis, and I took it over in 94. And I had his original band then, which was a bit being thrown in at the deep end. About 2 years ago I took it off the road, revamped it, had some younger players in and players of my choice as now I write and arrange music. And so now it's Debbie Curtis Radio Big Band because people kept asking who Eddie was. We play all sorts of arrangements from swing, Ted Heath, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Miller, Neil Hefti, loads of who I consider really good composers, arrangers.
A whole lot of names that a certain generation would know. Do you know who your audience is? Are you sort of focusing on people of an older generation, or is this kind of music, it's coming back, it's still popular?
I think it's really popular with young people as long as they have access to it. I mean, the thing I'm trying to do is I use a thing called like new retro, so I'm using all my CDs are grooved like the old 78s. And our DVD is like a really old film reel. It comes in a tin. So older people, it's got the nostalgic visual look to it. And for younger people, it's quite sweet and retro-y. And the music I'm tending to, although I'm using a lot of older arrangements, the ones I'm actually writing in there, I'm putting in things like Hawaii 5-0 and another Heath number, Jericho, which is very, very lively. I tend to count in a bit more up-tempo than some of the other band leaders. Ray McPhail, Sid Lawrence, mine tends to be a little on the faster end.
Now, were you always interested in this kind of music? Because, as I say, it's the kind of thing, I guess you always had it around you, yeah?
I grew up with it. My mum was an opera singer, which actually, to be honest, I don't think I appreciated really opera. And, you have to go and see it, I think, live again. My dad was a big band leader, so, yeah, and grew up on a farm, really. That was pretty much it, that and animals. And I didn't think I was going to go into it, though. I thought I might go into OCBC kind of sounding music, but I didn't. The band, even in my teens, I kept growing in size. They started at 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 piece. Yeah, and now it's sort of 16 piece plus reenactors, dancers. As far as growing into that music, I'm really glad I did. And every young person I've taken, or anybody under the age of sort of 20, to the shows, they've always wanted to come back. And so that's a really good move with it, I think. I hope.
So where do you play most of all?
I'm trying to play in really decent venues like the London Palladium, which we've played in, and we've got the Old Vic Theatre coming up, Her Majesty's Theatre, Theatre Royal, and what I would call the home of big band swing music, and also places where young and old people go out for the evening to have a good time. Some people would say that it's music that should be in dancing venues, and I think it is, but I've got a slight touch of the Stan Kenton, I think, about me, where I actually quite like being a show band as well, people coming to listen to that music. Anywhere we can fit in, really, on the other side of it. So if there's anybody got room in their living room, willing to book us.
Is that the origins of it? It's a dance band. If you think about Glenn Miller and things like that, then they were an accompaniment, weren't they, for a whole evening? At what point did it cross over and become something that you go and watch and enjoy?
Yeah, a lot of the original bands that came from sort of, Harlem, uptown, downtown, and the Miller Band, which was like a marching band. Glenn Miller had a lot of history after the usual thing, a bit like artists after he died. But they were predominantly dance-orientated because you had places like Hammersmith Palais and La Paloma Ballroom and things. I think the crossover really was probably huge music venues started shutting down because television became available, so people didn't have to go out. And also you started to have a slightly different edge to the bands. The bands got smaller because it was the 50s, and then you got things like, Chubby Checker really, who ruined it for me as a band leader, as for big bands, because things like the twist came about, so individual dancing came about, so those kind of, partner dancing tended to go out of fashion. I think it's still in fashion now, definitely in America. There's a lot of clubs that do it. In this country, I think we're a little bit behind. I think we're hard to get out of the armchair, into the real world a lot of the time, unless it is to somewhere like the Palladium, But I'm trying to change that.
The makeup of a big band, there was always a lot said about Glenn Miller, how he chose which instruments were going to be in the big band. Do you have very much say, or do you have to follow certain lines?
Because I write for a 16-piece band, so that's 5 saxes, 4 trumpets, 4 trombones, and a rhythm section, bass guitar, which is I use a string bass, which actually the tuba was there before the string bass, so I don't go that far back in history, but I do on bass trombone use a tuba player. So on certain tracks, and I actually put them in on Hawaii 5/0. And one of the reasons I did that is to try and get some kind of musical history in it. So I suppose I do use the big band as what you would call a structured big band, but I try and put in little quirky bits sometimes, and I change certain arrangements a bit, like with the tuba. But because it's so big and clumsy, it's not necessarily practical on really fast songs. It gets a bit lumpy then.
Is this a particularly British-American thing? That's the two countries that you think of most?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the history of big bands, really you've got sort of, I would say Fletcher Henderson should be the king of swing, as opposed to Benny Goodman. Benny Goodman got the notoriety. If anybody doesn't know Fletcher Henderson, he was one of the first people to put music notation down. So you've got your British influence of your papa stuff, and you've got your American instruments influence, where you had instruments available to people who weren't, at that time, hadn't had them before. So they were able to play growling trombone and, untutored. So it was more, you've got improvisation coming. So the crossover of the American-British is really where my personal interest is.
The crossover, was that during the 1940s? Is that when it happened? Is it that it was the American influence of the troops over here?
Yes, really. Unfortunately, sort of typically British stiff upper lip thing. We didn't want the American bands over. So then when it came to wanting to go over there ourselves, we were unable to go over because we'd put a law in place that we couldn't. So we ended up slowing ourselves down musically. But Ted Heath was the first British musician in this country who made a cooperative between British and American musicians, which was like James Reese, responsible for the Musicians' Union. And that change meant that the sort of crossover became Americans here and British there. So it was probably initially American-dominated. If you go right back, it was, African-American dominated, bossa nova, Brazilian jazz.
When you're up there in front of your band, what's your definition of a good night?
If people enjoy it, number one, and want to come back without a doubt. But really, audience interaction, so it feels warm and you like it from the moment you get that on the stage, making sure that you're talking to the audience, they're understanding what you're saying without being really boring, and being really entertaining, making people want to get up out their seats, if anything, in a show and dance, perhaps the other way round in a non-dancing venue. And that was how big bands, actually, the history started, was people wanted to get up and dance. But saying that, at the Palladium, I did do that, and I was told off, due to contract number, whatever. I was not supposed to do that, so don't dance in the aisles. I mean that most sincerely, folks.
At the moment it's on stage, have you actually broken through to TV?
We're just getting into that, obviously, logistics-wise, because one of the things I really is important to me, and I think is good to have these days, is because there's a lot of visual things. I've used the internet. We're the fastest growing big band on the internet today, which is nice, that music is actually getting out there. As far as television, logistically, to take 16 people out is quite a lot, but the more I'm getting other recognition, the easier it's getting. And I'm getting to the point now where one of the reasons I had a DVD done was basically because I can actually use snippets of that on television as broadcast quality, which makes certain kind of shows, like morning television shows, it makes us available to be able to go on it as a band, but without actually having to have the affordability of putting 16 people there for a 5-minute show, But I'm determined to get it on there. Yeah, absolutely determined. Get it everywhere, really. I think it's really good quality music, and not enough good quality things are out there at the moment. Everything sells itself cheap, Really nice to have genuine songwriting in it. I've got music notation packages on the computer, but I actually do it with pen and ink. I use a Platinum Koi music pen if anyone's interested. And they are humongously expensive because they've got music in it. God, I'm boring.
Big band leader Debbie Curtis, with a new CD coming out soon and performances across the capital. That's it for this edition of Classic FM Arts Daily. Thanks for listening. Join me again tomorrow.